Ohio Congressman Tim Ryan is the latest Democrat to enter the 2020 race. Ryan has represented Northeast Ohio since 2003. After the 2016 election, Ryan mounted a bid to replace Nancy Pelosi as House Minority Leader, but he ultimately lost by a 2-to-1 margin. Ryan is the latest candidate to enter the massive Democratic primary field, and it's expected to keep growing. Former Vice President Joe Biden, California Congressman Eric Swalwell, and ex-Alaska Senator Mike Gravel are all reportedly close to announcing their candidacies. Joining me now to talk about the state of the 2020 race are CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, CBSN political contributor and Democratic strategist Antjuan Seawright, and Washington Post national politics reporter Sean Sullivan, who is also a CBSN political contributor. All right, welcome to you all. My cup runneth over with analysis today. So excited. Sean, this is your inaugural onset appearance here, so let me start with you. We know Tim Ryan from his challenge to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, but what about his politics? Where does he actually stand on the issues?
Well, he's trying to present himself as a champion of working class voters, as somebody who can particularly appeal to white working class voters, people in areas that Donald Trump won. And he's trying to position himself as somebody who's a progressive, but somebody who can also appeal to moderate voters. It's a difficult challenge because you have so many different candidates right now. So the key for him is, can he find a following? Can he find a constituency in a race that's really, really crowded, full of candidates who are trying to do similar things, and full of a lot of other candidates who are from Congress but who are much better known than Tim Ryan?
I mean, Caitlin, to that point, is it clear who his constituency could be? Because, you know, that graphic that we keep showing is getting harder and harder to fit everyone on when you look at the Democratic primary field.
You know, it is really interesting to wonder what his constituency is, and you think about Sherrod Brown, who is the senator recently reelected in Ohio, had more of a kind of a platform, at least a national platform. People were starting to get to know him. He was elected statewide in Ohio several times. At least he had that. Ryan will have a different kind of challenge ahead. He is from an area of the country that Democrats do want to win back, and he is making that central to his pitch to voters. But there is this question, it does come up against the backdrop of this question that Democrats have been having about, you know, the diversity within their party, the diversity in this field, and is there room for someone like him? That's a big question.
Antjuan, let me ask you, I mean, is the Democratic field perhaps in danger of being too big with all of these candidates?
There's no such thing of having too big of a field when we need to have a very robust, intense primary so that we can see who's the best person to put on the field as the first string quarterback. And I think that's what we have. To your thought earlier about who's his constituency, he has a leg up on the yoga constituency. He's a big yoga person, and I think he will attract yoga voters.
Yoga voters?
He will attract
Tell me about that. Explain this to me, Antjuan.
Tim Ryan, I know him personally, he's a friend.
Okay.
He is a big yoga person, and he will attract yoga voters from across the spectrum. So that's one thing. But I think that his appeal is very complicated because there are a lot of people who are going after working class white people. However, we make the assumptions that everyone who's announcing their candidacy or is flirting with the idea of running for president really wants to be the nominee. Some want to raise a profile, some want to raise an issue, and there's someone who just want to remind Democrats in order for us to be successful in the general election, we have to win the Rust Belt. And Tim Ryan represents the Rust Belt, where working class white voters, some assume that we've lost our footing with them, particularly in the last election.
So, Caitlin, I know that you've been talking to Democratic voters about this. What have they had to say?
Well, about the big field, you know, it's interesting because when you talk to voters out in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, these early states where all of these candidates are flocking, they're really excited about having these choices this time around. That's kind of a new phenomenon, really, for Democrats, so they're energized by that process. But I am starting to sense, at least on the ground, that voters are saying, okay, we have enough candidates. Let me start to assess all of them together. They are very welcoming to candidates, I'm finding, but I have heard from lots of voters, let's see what our field is now. Let's cut it off and let's get towards winnowing down this field, assessing the candidates on their record, on their personalities, and the debates will provide a really good structure for them to start kind of picking who they like and who they want to move forward versus who they don't.
You want to say something?
You're making us something. Like, this process has been on steroids from the very beginning. And so keep in mind, everyone who's in the race now will not be in the race by the time we get to next year. Not even probably the end of the year, because at some point money's going to dry up. At some point the amount of people who will support them will dry up. And so you will see a collapse starting to happen at some point. Now, when that will happen, no one knows, but we even know that everyone won't even make the debate stage.
Yeah, I want to ask, let's focus on Joe Biden, because this is something that has been really interesting to watch, how the former vice president has navigated this issue. First of all, you all saw President Trump tweeted this edited version of Joe Biden's video statement in which he addressed the accusations of inappropriate touching against him. I mean, Sean, is this going to be essentially a consistent line of attack? There's that edited video that President Trump tweeted out. But is this going to be something that we're going to be hearing about if Joe Biden jumps into the race, something that'll come back over and over again?
Quite possibly, yes. And I think the worry for his team right now is whether this comes to be the thing that defines him. And it comes at a moment where he appears to be on the verge of announcing his presidential campaign. He wants to introduce himself on his terms. He wants to talk about the issues that he cares about. And the reality is if he goes to South Carolina and Iowa and New Hampshire and everything he's asked about at town halls, everything he's asked about by local reporters, by national press is about this, it's going to be hard for him to break through on the things he wants to talk about. And on top of that, if you have more women, more individuals coming out and making these allegations, each time a new person comes out, it's a new thing that he's going to have to answer for. So it could potentially be politically a complication for him.
What do you think, Antjuan? I mean, how do you think Democratic primary voters are going to be looking at this issue, considering the fact that President Trump was elected despite having multiple allegations of sexual assault against him?
Republicans fall in line. We fall in love as Democrats, unfortunately. And that means that they don't care what happens along the way, i.e. Donald Trump. They still voted for him, and they said we're voting for party over person. In fact, on our side, we tend to vote for the person, and if that person has some sort of scar or some sort of bruise and they don't feel like it can limp across the finish line, then we go away. And that's my biggest fear. But for Joe Biden, I think he's such a stabilizing force that I'm not sure how much this will impact him early on. Now later, if conversation intensifies, more women come out, his opponents start to double down the attack, it could be problematic. The thing he cannot allow is to let his enemies define him in this primary too early.
So one politician who is not disavowing Joe Biden over these accusations is Stacey Abrams. Here she is being asked about the former vice president earlier today.
I am friends with Lucy Flores, and I appreciate her bringing her story forward. I also have deep respect for Vice President Joe Biden. We cannot have perfection as a litmus test. The responsibility of leaders is to not be perfect, but to be accountable, to say, I've made a mistake, I understand it, and here's what I'm going to do to reform as I move forward. And I think we see Joe Biden doing that.
So, Antjuan, what do you make of those comments?
I think Stacey Abrams speaks for a lot of people. Even though they may not say it publicly. Look, we can't get distracted as Democrats and tear each other apart so much to the point where it's hard to put the pieces to the puzzle back together for the general election. And that's what I've been saying to every candidate who's reached out to me. Run your race, speak to your platform, but don't get into this business of trying to rip each other apart that we can't come back together as a party, because this is a scrimmage. Primaries are a scrimmage. This is not the big game. The big game will be against the Republican nominee in November of next year.
So it's interesting. Stacey Abrams did not hesitate to shut down this rumor that Joe Biden would package his campaign announcement with a pledge to choose her as his vice president. Here's her response when she was asked about that.
I think it is deeply problematic that they are making things up, but what I would say is this. I do not believe you run for second place, and I do not intend to enter a presidential race as a primary candidate for vice president. If I enter the race for president, I will enter the race for president. But once we have a nominee, I am open to having conversations. Should I not be someone who's running, I'm open to conversations with anyone.
I mean, Sean, do we have any sense of how real a possibility this prospect of a Biden-Abrams ticket ever was?
You know, it's hard to say. This could be one of those things that just sort of pops up in the rumor mill. But certainly in the long term, when you look at the prospect of them coming together on a ticket, it seems far more likely that that would come together after a primary if he were to win the nomination, if he were to run. There's a lot of ifs in between then and now. And this idea of, you know, pairing these two candidates together on a ticket would certainly be an unusual idea. I mean, Ted Cruz in his campaign in 2016, at the end of his campaign, tried to pull together a ticket with Carly Fiorina. That did not work at all. So, you know, the idea of doing something unusual like this off the bat would be very, very surprising.
And it was shown as a sign of weakness for Ted Cruz. And I'm not one of those people who wants to give the premature benediction to Stacey Abrams' political career. Who knows? She could be a person who comes into to the race to run for the nomination. So I think all the speculation is just really noise.
And I think the speculation, though, speaks to the point that she is becoming a real force in the Democratic Party, almost a kingmaker of sorts. She not only met with Joe Biden, she met with others like Kirsten Gillibrand and others who have been wanting her to run for the Senate or have been offering their advice and seeking her advice because she did so well in Georgia. So whether or not she runs for the presidency, she said she would announce whether she will run for Senate sometime soon and maybe the presidency later if she doesn't go that route. But she is going to be someone in the party that people are going to be reaching out to whether or not she runs.
She represents African-American women, the most dominant and forceful voting bloc in our party. No one can mistake that. No one can underestimate
Powerful
that.
position to be in.
Black women love Stacey Abrams. They respect her. She ran a hell of a race, and you can't discount that. And the fact that she did so well in Ruby Red, Georgia, says everything about her and her potential and her future in this party. And I think everyone will be attracted to the idea of having an association with Stacey Abrams.
It'll be fascinating to watch. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Antjuan Seawright, and Sean Sullivan. So great to have all of you here. Thank you.